Welcome to Leading Entrepreneurs of the World. My name is Glenn Turansky, and I'm a member of the advisory board of One Business World. Leading Entrepreneurs of the World features entrepreneurs, founders, business leaders presenting on cutting-edge topics and the latest in industry developments. Today, we're very pleased to welcome leading entrepreneur and CEO, George Tsiatis. George is the CEO and co-founder of the Resolution Project. Since Resolution's inception, George has been one of the driving forces behind the organization, co-developing the Social Venture Challenge, leading the design of the current Guides program, and imagining the forthcoming Resolution Institute and the Solve Summit. Resolution was founded in 2007 to develop and empower young leaders so they can pursue socially responsible solutions to issues affecting communities around the world. Resolution has designed the Social Venture Challenge to be an inspiring call to action for university students with an idea for a social venture. The Resolution team has also created Resolution Fellowships to be an ecosystem of support to help young professionals implement their ideas and develop themselves as socially responsible leaders. George, we're very happy to have you here with us today. We look very much forward to your presentation and hearing more about the developments at Resolution. So let me hand it off over to you, and we welcome you to Leading Entrepreneurs of the World.
Thanks so much, Glenn. I appreciate the introduction and the invitation to be here today. I'm really excited to speak a little bit about what our experience over the past decade plus has been in supporting social enterprises and impact ecosystems. We come at this from a very specific lens focused on young people who are starting social enterprises and building them up. But there's a lot here that's broadly applicable to the business community, the business world, and I think something that entrepreneurs and innovators everywhere can take away from this. So happy to share what our journey has been, what we've learned, and maybe a few areas where folks can have some takeaways that they can apply in their work. To give a little bit of background on the Resolution Project, as Glenn noted, we started in 2007. In simple terms, we fund, mentor, and support young people starting social enterprises in their home communities. We're a 501c3, a nonprofit charity, and this focus is particularly to draw out the innovation and the ideas and the creativity of young people and bring them to bear on some of the biggest challenges. When you think about entrepreneurship, entrepreneurship isn't about starting businesses. It's about solving problems. Right. And so social entrepreneurship is just a particular form of this. And, when we go to these young people and we ask them, what's a problem in your community, a problem that you know, a problem that you understand, and how would you solve it? We get some amazing innovations. I'll talk about a few of them a little later. But the way that our program operates is that we partner with youth leadership summits, with scholarship programs, with higher education institutions, and we host these social venture challenge competitions, inviting young people to bring their best idea. We're issue area agnostic, we're geographically agnostic. What we're looking for is people with proximity to the issues, who have a really deep understanding of the issues and of what resources the community has that they can bring to bear on them, and how they can be the force that mobilizes and activates those resources. Of course, we're also looking for really innovative models, new ways of attacking these things, right? Because these are usually systemic issues. They're problems that have plagued a community or society for a long time. And upending those requires a lot of behavior change often for communities. And that takes a lot of hard work. I think that's the hardest work that someone can undertake. And so we run these competitions. We use sort of a multi-phase process, online submissions, an in-person social venture forum, and then or at least now it's been more virtual, and then a virtual pitch, sort of one of those standard Shark Tank-esque stand and deliver and answer questions from the judges. We select winners from that, and then we run a light diligence process to make sure that they're going to be able to follow through on what they presented in the competition. And at that point, they unlock their fellowship. So they get seed funding, dedicated mentors, access to subject matter experts, pro bono resources, sequenced opportunities that are curated specifically for them and their needs. Really a community and an ecosystem of support for them. And this starts to get into some of the different pieces that I think we'll spend a bit more time on, which is sort of baselining this conversation around impact ecosystems and social entrepreneurship as a whole. But just before we get to that, I'll sort of give you a sense of the scale at which we operate as an organization. We have over 500 fellows in 80 countries and over 20 US states. They've started over 350 social enterprises, benefited over 2.9 million people with that work. They've raised tens of millions of dollars. They've generated tens of millions of dollars in revenue. And in fact, we just had a fellow who achieved unicorn status with a $2.1 billion valuation. So they range from fellows who are doing things like that have a hyperscale mode attached to them. And then they also operate in the sphere of community projects that, of course, generate scale for human capital, right? And so an example of that would be, we have a fellow in Kenya whose project was to dig a well because the community, as a result of the impacts of climate change, had been losing access to its major source of clean water. And so water was being trucked in and sold at a high cost. Digging the well did a few things. No longer made it necessary for water to be trucked in. And so they continued to charge a small amount to be able to maintain it, to maintain the well, but also use that to subsidize the community health clinic, which had been operating at only partial capacity, to bring it up to full-time capacity. So you've got this sort of beautiful closed loop system where several basic needs are being met at a higher efficiency. And as a result, there are a ton of positive outcomes for the community: better healthcare, clean water that's local and maintained, jobs that are created as a result of all of this. And while that project won't scale, right, suddenly you have kids in this community that are able to go to school instead of going out and searching for water. You have women who are able to undertake economic activity that they weren't able to before, because again, some of these needs are being met. And of course, you have more prevention around healthcare than acute situations that have to be dealt with at the clinic, and that's leading to better healthcare outcomes. So all of this, of course, scales the human capacity within that community. And so we think about this as most people do in business, right? Even as a nonprofit, we think of this as a broad portfolio, where we're going to have those huge outperforming, massively scaling ventures, and we're also going to have these what you'd think of in a business setting as as sort of a slow and steady growth vehicle that's going to return a dividend, right? And you're going to want a portfolio that has some of those different things. It's just that capital isn't the only way that we measure impact and growth. And so, I think that provides a good segue to sort of talk about what social enterprise is. It's become a lot more mainstream. Social enterprise is a term coined by Bill Drayton, who's the founder of Ashoka. There are a lot of different specific takes around social enterprise, but generally there's agreement that this is a sustainable model that returns value to society, right? So we think of business and enterprise as returning value to shareholders. Social enterprise is more focused on sustainability rather than growth, and more focused on delivering value to society rather than just shareholders. The two aren't mutually exclusive, right? You can return value to shareholders and to society. Um, but social enterprises come into play because they can address things like market failures that businesses can't necessarily address. And so, for us, as a charitable organization focused on launching these social entrepreneurs, these change makers, these problem solvers, social enterprise is the vehicle by which we choose to get them started, and to support them. Similarly, there was another pair of buzzwords in the title of this conversation, and that was impact ecosystems. And so I want to unpack that a little bit. Ecosystem is this sort of incredibly broad term. It comes from biology and science, really. But what it unearths and uncovers is this interconnectedness between players. And we see business ecosystems operating all the time. We don't necessarily recognize or call them ecosystems, right? You've got the vendors that you rely on. You've got your sort of channel partners for sales. You have your, you have your investors. You have your clients, right? All of these folks are interconnected with your business, with the way that you operate. And so, you could think of them as an ecosystem, especially if you zoom out and you look at multiple businesses and the way that these businesses are served or serve, and the way that they're connected with other partners, right? This is what an ecosystem starts to look like. When we talk about impact ecosystems, we're talking about many of the same elements, but then there's this other layer, and you'll notice that really throughout this conversation, I like to think of this as capitalism plus, right? This is everything that exists within capitalism, and then there's this social layer that brings in even more stakeholders, and takes a broader look at things. And so, when we talk about impact ecosystems, we're not just talking about those that serve and are served by the business. We're also talking about government and policymakers. We're talking about impact investors, pension funds. We're talking about public sector organizations. We're talking about partners that that also serve the same beneficiaries, right? So you may run something like that well that I mentioned, right, in Kenya, but the healthcare clinic that's associated with that is just as connected to that model as as the actual employees who are maintaining and running that. And so this sort of impact ecosystem is this broader group, and we've gotten more specific in how we think about it as an organization. It's about and we put entrepreneurs and innovators at the center of that. That is how we operate, how we think about it. Social enterprise is a very specific mode of problem solving that relies on sort of force of character. In the same way that entrepreneurship does, it just has more stakeholders. And so, when we think about that ecosystem, we center it around those entrepreneurs, and then we look one layer out, right? Who's serving them and who are they serving, right? And so usually that's customers, that's beneficiaries, that's service providers, and then there's one layer out, which is who else is serving that same grouping, and are there efficiencies to be found, right? So it's partners who are also in the same sector that are complementary in their service offerings, because again, when you're not just serving capital flow, right, when you're also serving outcomes, that those complementary things really make a big difference. So to use another example, this is something that we do as an organization, right? We work with young people. They're our source of entrepreneurs, right? Within our ecosystem, within the impact ecosystem, universities are an important partner. Upskilling programs are an important partner. Other accelerator and incubator programs, they're important partners. Right? If we operate without being connected to those, we're doing a disservice ultimately to the talent that's in our organization, to the young people that are at the center of this work. Right. And then you go out one layer further and you look at policy, right? You look at policy, you look at business, you look at investors, you look at philanthropy, philanthropic dollars, you look at public dollars, like things that can go into social impact bonds and the like, pay for success models, right? And you've got that layer of players, development banks, multilateral development banks, regional development banks, and players like that, right? So you get to this really macro setting eventually, and then you start to recognize how this actually isn't that different from a lot of the organization that's already happened within the for-profit space. You've had this really, really efficient sequencing of capital food chains that exists, right? You're an entrepreneur, right? You get started, you raise a family and friends round, you get some sales or some commitments, you go out and you get a loan on that, right? You get maybe a credit line. And then you build enough proof of concept, you get that MVP running, and you go out and you work on that Series A, that seed round, that Series A, one or the other, depending on where you're scaling. You get some help from that lead investor to push forward on a Series B, right? And up you go up the capital food chain until you either find an appropriate partner and have an exit, or find a way to continue that growth path in partnership, right? Or you move into public markets and you build that way, right? So there's a very clear and sequenced path in capital food chains. But social entrepreneurship doesn't always map exactly that same way, because again, there's the possibility that you're dealing with a market failure, right? The way the money is aligned doesn't match up to where the problem or the issue or the inefficiency is. And that can be a really big issue. Look, I think a couple of trends that I would note are, I keep referring to this as social enterprise. I am of the mind that this is what enterprise will become. It's not going to be social enterprise anymore. This is simply going to be the way that we do business. We've seen trends towards this, and this is largely consumer driven. A lot of organizations are under fire for not having enough social benefit, for being extractive, for being focused on profit and not considering what they're doing for their community or how they're connecting. This continues to be a push that we're seeing from consumers. And frankly, it looks like it's going to continue to be the case. We're also seeing evidence that it's increasingly beyond consumers, it's just market driven. We can't hide externalities the way that we did in, say, the 80s, right? Like when there are negative costs associated with operating a business, regulation has become more efficient at identifying those and at calling those out and at creating a mechanism for paying that. In our increasingly globalized work, we've seen races to the bottom by different countries. But we've also seen countries joining in to try to prevent that. And I think the trend's looking to be in the direction that that's not going to be the path forward. And when you think about what something like just carbon pricing would do to markets, and that would have a huge corrective, that would be a hugely corrective force, immediately shocking, but eventually over the long run, it would basically just be pricing in things that are costs that'll have to be borne at some point. And it looks like the trend is heading towards where that's more likely to be a reality. As far as the timing goes, who knows when that'll actually take effect. But generally what I'm trying to say is, I think it's unavoidable that at some point all business will be social business. And that really calls on us to start to look inward as entrepreneurs to see, am I really ready to make that jump? And how can I prepare my business to be part of that, to be part of that social economy, to be part of that that mode of operating? So, look, I think maybe to reflect back on some special moments in business and some special places in business, right? The term Silicon Valley has spawned everything, right? I say that, and you're probably imagining, a pack of hoodie wearing, 20-something-year-olds that have an app to sell, right? You're also probably thinking about a television comedy. You're also probably thinking about Elon Musk, right? And I think it's important to reflect on what makes Silicon Valley so special, right? It's that confluence of academia, of government, and business coming together. It's these powerful centers of innovation that are well-funded in Stanford and Berkeley. But it's also these public-private partnerships and government being present and investment being present, and a huge appetite for risk. Right. And what I'm trying to point out here is that Silicon Valley isn't about the success. It's about the process. It's about having fertile soil. Right. And we see a recipe in impact ecosystems that also, has sort of its own recipe. Right. We see a lot of things that are comparable. We see the need for having space for failure. We see the need for having the presence of public-private partnerships, of factoring in the needs of government, of people, of beneficiaries. But it also, fundamentally, it prioritizes human relationships as a key element. So the word social has come up a lot. I've said it a lot, right? What do I mean by that? I mean human relationships to each other, to the place that they live, to their community, to capital, to their needs, to their wants, right? And so it's that connection over capital alone that changes the recipe. Because instead of shopping for like how many users can I get, and how much is the cost of acquisition per user, the conversation is, how credible is this person within the communication channels that exist within this community? And how much are they going to be able to access and influence the behavior of this community to change that behavior to something that is more efficient, more beneficial, right? Because we've seen that there's this sort of economic belief, and this sort of fictitious person who's like a rational human being, right? And behaves rationally. But human beings are deeply irrational, right? And we operate in so many surprising ways that that really bewilder someone who bewilder economists, right? And so when we think about how social entrepreneurs can really transform community, oftentimes it's not just about offering people something better for a better price. It's about actually getting them to change their behaviors. And so, their ability to utilize the levers in those communities, to utilize the relationships and the trust that exists in those communities, is a bigger factor than just, is this going to be economically efficient? and so really in impact work, scale and profitability are not the unique metrics of success. And so what we found is that ecosystems need to mimic that. It's about multi-stakeholder management. It's about communication channels. It's about measuring and eliminating negative externalities. And it's about being really, really thoughtful and critical about those, and finding the right payer. Because unlike sort of normal businesses, ordinary business as usual, if I may, the customer isn't always the person who's equipped to pay. I'll give you an example that I've been recently introduced to that I think is a pretty interesting model, but maybe shows how you can still align interests for many different stakeholders, while achieving a number of business goals. So the model is this, and it's an organization called Forte. Forte is pioneering it. Fundamentally, there are employment issues for low-skill workers, right? In a fourth industrial revolution world, you can't train people up usually as quickly as they're being laid off in an environment where a customer needs to pay for it, right? But their focus is on enlarging the pie. And so what they do is they bring investors around the table, and they get investors to pay for upskilling for, say, factory workers that have been laid off. And the return for the investors is paid by government. So what government does is they're going to be getting income tax if people successfully complete those upskilling programs and get gainfully employed. All right, they're going to be getting income tax that they weren't getting otherwise. And so what they're doing is committing to give back a piece of that to the investors for a period of time, for making that possible, right? So suddenly you're in a situation where government's getting funding that they weren't going to get otherwise. Investors are getting a return that's appropriate for a market rate return, and you've got workers who are out of work, who now have gainful employment, have picked up new skills, and have been employed and earning incomes that they weren't going to be earning otherwise. Right? This is the sort of win-win-win, triple win, omni-win, however you want to think of it, that creates a bigger pie, and sort of scratches our itch as a capitalist economic system to deliver returns to people that take risks, but also upends the way that we think of these issues and the way that we think of something like lifetime learning, right? Our system of education hasn't caught up to the rate of change, but having tools like this at play to address that really gives us space to evolve in that regard. I'll give you another example where, and this is something that one of our fellows has done. She's just started a venture, or she's just officially launched a venture called Equip, and she reached her sort of state of understanding on that through the venture, through a nonprofit that she started, and then a venture that we supported. And the nonprofit was focused on young people with eating disorders, and helping them get access to what are really expensive treatment centers. And so they basically ran a scholarship program to give people access that wouldn't have access otherwise, help them through their recovery. We helped them on a program that specifically supported families of people suffering from eating disorders. And there was a lot of learning that they took away from that in terms of what that support network meant for people's long-term prospects of recovery. Now, from all of this, Christina, who's the entrepreneur, she went and she said, there's a problem here, and giving out 10, 20, 50, 100 scholarships or sort of yeah, scholarships basically to support people's recovery journeys, it's not enough, right? We have a market failure going on because these folks, when they have a relapse, they can't afford to go back in for 20, 30, $50,000 to one of these centers. They end up in an ER, right? And that's an expensive proposition for insurance companies or for the government that ends up footing the bill on that. And this is a large scale issue, right? There's millions of people suffering from eating disorders. So what did she do? She structured a business. It's called Equip. She's raised $17 million in a Series A. And the model is that they bring together a treatment team to support recovery and basically provide a much earlier intervention in a process that otherwise usually waits until it becomes acute, right? So by getting at it before it becomes acute, before it becomes chronic, and by making this treatment team available, right? So your primary care physician, a nutritionist, a psychiatrist, a family coach and therapist, right? All of these folks that can be there for a holistic approach to your treatment. She was also able to convince insurance companies they should get on board with this, and that it fundamentally operates more like preventative care that prevents these expensive outcomes that end up falling on this, falling at the feet of the system, by getting to it early, serving more people, and creating a real mechanism, right? So insurance companies are in as a payer for what otherwise would look like a market failure, but ultimately produces greater market efficiencies, right? And so it's brilliant, right? It's complex because it involves so many stakeholders, but these problems have been complex and chronic, and like it's not the sort of thing where you can always just slap an app on it and it's and the problem's solved. And so these are the types of things that our fellows are working on, that we're proud to support them in. And I'll take a beat there. I'll sort of pause on storytelling there just to maybe bring back a little bit of the mechanics on this for how we approach this resolution, because I do think that's an important piece, right? And like we're talking about starting these social entrepreneurs, gave the primer on impact ecosystems. So how does this all come together within a system like what we do at Resolution? And probably the most specific way to explain this is that we built a set of partnerships as an organization at the global level. Right, we brought in we've structured this as sort of what we think of as a pathway. We have organizations that come before us. They train talent. They introduce concepts of impact and social responsibility to young people. They provide self-actualization, self-belief training, right? The types of leadership experiences that make someone young think, hey, you know what? Maybe I could do this. Maybe I could be the person to solve this problem, right? And then we think of, obviously, ourselves as an organization that helps catalyze that impact. As an organization, we're always the first to fund, always the first to believe. And so, that's where we fit into the process. We come in at that stage. And then we think of other organizations down that pathway as sort of opportunity partners, right? They're interested in meeting great talent that has developed MVPs, proof of concept, early stage track records. And we're interested in pathing that talent, right? Taking that first investment that we put in and making it possible for that to grow if it's already shown that it can. And so we've sort of built our own ecosystem with those earlier talent development programs and those later talent and venture opportunity stages, where it's follow-on funders, it's investors, it's leadership development programs, management training programs, and the like. right? And so that's been a big piece of how we've thought about our ecosystem. What we've done more recently is that we've also started to sort of, I'll say, clone that in local formats. And so we've taken that idea that we and that work that we've done at a global scale, and we've started to seed a few different innovation hubs, one in Kigali, one in Nairobi, one in Singapore, all to further cultivate the ecosystems there, right? And to support talent relentlessly in those places, right? And that's about connecting with aspiring social entrepreneurs and bringing them in to see what people from their own community have done with things like a resolution fellowship, or with local funding and support. And so it's this open piece of infrastructure that we offer back to the community to bring talent in, and also to bring in investors, to bring in policymakers, members of the ministries, private corporations that are looking at innovation, investment opportunities, and new ideas that are coming through, who are interested in what talent is coming up and how they can connect with it and build it up, right? And so launching these innovation hubs has been a way to sort of lengthen our impact and increase the center of gravity around what is effectively a movement for responsible business. It takes shape in different places differently. In that sense, it's sort of it's a reflection of where that community is at that time. In Kigali, there's a lot of focus on investment readiness and how to access those formal capital food chains, how to make yourself credit worthy and be able to access a debt round, or to be able to access and pitch impact investors. In Nairobi, it's been more about market access and market creation. In Singapore, it's been more about sort of regional plays and ways to take things that are being innovated and incubated within Singapore and access markets outside of Singapore more regionally. And so it's been a really interesting journey. We've been excited by it. But I just wanted to share that as another tangible way to think about how impact ecosystems take place, and where, if you as an entrepreneur, as a business leader, as an investor, are thinking about how to get involved in impact investing, in social entrepreneurship, in these ecosystems, to think about where you can tie into those systems. So I've tried to cover a lot of ground. I hope this has been useful and helpful. I'm happy to talk about any topics that maybe piqued your interest, Glenn, and share a bit more.
Wow, where to begin, George? Tremendous. Wow, just outstanding. Couple of thoughts. I was taking a bunch of notes as we went through. Some of what you described when you're thinking about acute care versus preventative care. A lot of what your projects and your fellowships are working on, in at least my view, is population health. You're really taking that next level of, it's not all about going to the emergency department where you're going to ring up giant costs. It's really, it's keeping you out of that department, right? Part of the problem with I think our healthcare system today is, we focus so much on the bright, shiny, next generation machine we're going to buy, right? And then the basic blocking and tackling is left behind. One of the things you often hear about, and everybody's experience is this: you go in and the first thing they ask you for is, please show me your insurance card.
Yeah.
How about they ask, did you eat today? Or, tell me about your neighborhood. What do you live next to a factory? Do you live next to any kind of sewage plant or anything like that? What's the underlying cause to some of your activities? Yeah. So a lot of what you described, certainly from a healthcare standpoint, is incredibly important. I love the fact that you bring together all of the parties, because all of the parties are part of the community. And that could be, as you mentioned, faith-based organizations who often carry tremendous credibility and trust in those communities. They come in, they're part of the solution, right? The government, individuals from the community, companies that might be well known. It all becomes really part of this ecosystem. The other thing I thought that was, and this is always at the core of all entrepreneurship, is what is the problem, right? Is there a real
Yeah.
problem? And how do you go about solving it? So I think some of the examples you gave us were really tremendous along those lines. And it's not just about a shiny app or a button to push. It's working through some of the underlying fundamentals. Some of what you described too. A good friend of mine is on the board of the UN General Compact, and a lot of what you just described sure sounds like the UN Sustainability Development Goals. And
Yeah.
you'll be checking off probably
Well,
most
we,
of the
we track
17.
to those. We track to those. As an organization, we're an SDG 17 organization.
Okay, sure.
Again, because when it comes down to it, right? We're not the entrepreneurs, right? We're building the whole vehicle, the whole space for entrepreneurs to thrive, right? So partnerships and collaboration, and creating that space, creating that fertile soil, right, for these
Yeah,
social entrepreneurs
absolutely.
to grow and be able to directly address the other 16 goals. That's where we see ourselves. But I think you hit it on the head, Glenn. It's for a long time, business as usual has been about finding finding sort of a crack and widening it. And this is about asking people what caused the crack and working with them to fill it. And there's a sort of mode of operation in this, a mentality that involves believing in abundance, right? Like you have to believe we have an amazing planet, and the human mind, the human imagination is an amazing thing, right? And in a setting where you believe those two things to be the case, right? The idea of enough becomes a really beautiful thing, right? Instead of more, more, more. And it can sound sort of idealistic in some ways, but the fundamental basics around human needs are fairly straightforward. And by the way, that's not me saying it, right? Like, economists have covered this for a long time, right? What do we need? We need our basic sustenance things. We have social and emotional needs. And for many people on the planet, their sustenance needs actually aren't being met, not because we can't produce enough food, not because we don't have adequate health care. It's because we've gone and structured these systems for a different time, and often around modes that were, look, I mean, I'm a student of history, right? They were designed to exploit at the time that they were designed, and we've only made incremental changes, right? We haven't gone back and said, hey, this system was around around the first industrial revolution. It's inadequate for a world like ours. And so when we're making these incremental changes, we're missing out on the bigger picture. That's the beauty of social entrepreneurship. It's about bringing people to the table, flipping this all around and saying, hey, we're looking at it wrong. Let's get to the root of the problem, right? In healthcare, you see this, you mentioned a few things. We probably need fewer machines, and we probably need more healthcare navigators, right? We probably need more people that are asking questions of people suffering from chronic diseases about, like, hey, did you take your medicine today?
Yep.
And if you didn't, why not? And how can we help? I'll touch a current, issue. This comes into play around systems of policing as well. How are we thinking about mental health? How are we thinking about things like traffic stops? How are we thinking about engaging, sort of members of the community? Are we thinking about these things as criminal activities? Are we thinking about them as challenges that communities want to work through? Are we thinking about them as social ills that need a lot of voices at the table? Are we thinking about them as, as sort of penal activities, right? There's the difference between, when I say the word discipline, everybody thinks of like detention. In fact, something like discipline, the word is actually about teaching, right? And like, how are we going about teaching and expanding our mode of operating as a society? How are we improving, not incrementally, but how are we actually transforming things so that they're better for more people, and so that we don't have these chronic systemic issues that just eat away at our planet, at our society, and ultimately hurt a lot of people. So
My college, King, put a plug in, King's College, Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. Part of our mission statement is we not only teach the students how to make a living, we teach them how to live.
Mm.
And that's, when you think about community activities, going back to the "Did you eat today?" question, or even from a policing standpoint, when you think about the climb out of poverty, going back to one of the examples you talked about, enlarging that pie, right? Coming back and saying, okay, here's an unskilled worker. Everybody wins. When somebody puts in the time and the investment in that time, treasure, and talent, right? The 3 T's, and you push it forward, everybody wins. The community wins, the taxing authority wins, the person, their self-worth goes up, they provide for their family, they have a place to live. All of those types of things kind of come into play. So as your fellows are examining this, I mean, I'm sure there's probably no shortage of potential problems they're trying to solve. When you work with them, though,
that's for sure.
I mean, how tough is it to kind of choose the finalists? I mean, is it? I mean, from an evaluation standpoint, I mean, they must be wonderful ideas across the board. It must be such a challenge for you to come back and say, okay, out of all of this is this from a funding standpoint. And again, being as you mentioned, being the first to fund and the first to believe, that's a huge cheerleader for all of these people.
Yeah, look, it's a special relationship that they form with the organization because, when somebody takes a chance on you, you don't forget it, right? When somebody sticks their neck out for you and says, you know what, I believe in you.
Yeah,
it's a pretty special thing. I've had those folks in my life, and the only thing that I need to remember in my life to is to thank those people time and time again, because they didn't have to. The selection process, we operate from a place of abundance even in that. And what I mean by that is not that we have a ton of money, right? We're a 501c3, we're a charity. We raise the money that we give out every year from the public. What I mean by that is that we have a couple of modes of thinking about it in our competition. First of all, anyone who competes, we commit to giving them feedback, right? And so we want to make it an opportunity where for what they're putting in, they're getting something back. They're really, I mean, it's a brave thing to stand up in front of a bunch of people you don't know and say, listen, this is a problem that I've observed in my community growing up for years. It's shameful. It's embarrassing. I hate that it's a part of my community. I hate that it's a part of my life, but we've been struggling with it for as long as I know, and I'm sick of it. And this is what I want to do to solve it. That's a soul-bearing moment, right? So we want to give those folks back and honor their, honor what they're offering to us with something in return. But the other piece that I mean when I say we operate from a place of abundance is we only accept, when we get to the finals of our competition, we can fund every single team that shows up for the finals, right? So we don't want to create a space of competition in that where it's, competing for scarce resources. We want it to be a space where if everyone shows that they're able to reach the bar, everybody gets supported, everybody gets funded, and everyone gets started. And that's a pretty important thing as a signal to these folks, right?
It almost sounds like a promise, right? You're in the system then, right? They've been brave enough, they've gotten up, they've spoken, they've articulated the problem, and they've framed it.
Well, and we, it doesn't mean that every single one that comes to the finals will get funded, right? They still need to stand and deliver and show that they're ready. But just knowing that you're not competing against others, you're competing against this, this idea of a fellow, this expectation, it puts it in your hands, right? Which is a pretty powerful thing for a young person who's trying to drive that.
Yeah.
Look, it's tough, but we always take some solace in the fact that this is not a one and done competition, as entrepreneurship isn't, right? Like, that, right? Like people come back for second, third, fourth, fifth bites at the apple. They launch things, they fail, they tank them completely. They learn a lot of things, and then they get something that catches, right? If someone comes to us with an idea and they don't get through, they don't get the fellowship, we encourage them to come back, whether it's to pitch that idea or another one. And so, even for folks that we tell them, not yet, you're not ready yet for this, we take quite a bit of solace knowing that, in fact, it's not yet.
Well, you're mentoring them even through that, right?
That's the hope.
You're giving them that kind of feedback, that kind of trust, and helping them say, okay, maybe not this time. Here's something to think about, or how to improve. As you go forward. And I think that's a tremendous service that's going back to them. Now, when you look at all of your circle of influencers, and I know you have a board of directors, you have ambassadors, you have guides and mentors. How do they all work together, and how does it kind of come together? Is one more of a limited nature? Because again, as a charity, right, from a volunteer standpoint, how do you interact with all the groups, and who plays what part in your structure?
Yeah. So, look, I mean, the legal answer is that our board of directors, is the fiduciaries for the organization. It's the fiduciary board. They keep a lookout for the finance, the governance, the direction of the organization, and they certainly carry that out extraordinarily. Our staff operates the program, pushes a lot of the direction. And certainly the delivery of all of it keeps the whole organization moving forward. And there are members of the staff that have been with the organization for nearly its entire lifetime, and they, not just them, but other leaders that we've brought in as members of the team. I mean, they're significant drivers of the direction of the organization. So it's been fantastic, to sort of see that interplay as well. But fundamentally, I think the question that you're getting to, Glenn, or I should say the answer you're getting to with that question is that Resolution is more of a community than it is an organization. And it has been since it started. And this comes back to some of the principles that I was talking about before of, like this is ecosystem, this is multi-stakeholder, this is layers and layers of people and human capital. And fundamentally, like, what is it that an entrepreneur needs, right? Yeah, they need capital, right? But like, as anyone who started up something, I've had a few entrepreneurial ventures of my own as well, outside of this, you have to be headed in the right direction first, right? Before you pour capital in, before you sort of make pushes like that, you need to know what's going on in the space. You need to be researched on every aspect of it. You need to be obsessed with the problem and with your solution. And you need to have the network that you can tap into, right? And the community that you see up among those boards, this is a network that the organization has built. Of course, each of those individuals has their own networks as well. And, the way that I think about it for our fellows is that when they join this community, when they become fellows, they're gaining access to that world-class network. And to be a little crass about it, right? It's an Ivy League network that's definitely top tier. And so, for them to be able to come from Durban, South Africa, or Dhaka, Bangladesh, or or Oklahoma City, right, and be able to tap into that because the organization believed in the strength of their idea and the strength of their leadership. You know, and they didn't have to prove that they could do it by going and raising money from family and friends, money that those family and friends might not have had. That they didn't need to prove it by building out an expensive MVP that they couldn't afford to build, that they can do it off the strength of their idea, their leadership, and the way that they sell it to an organization like ours gives them access to that network. That's a really powerful mechanism for giving some of the best and brightest who are, you know, overlooked and you know, sort of underestimated, right? Underestimated and overlooked talent to be given a chance to take their best shot at it, and to do so within a strong community, a network, and a set of resources that gives them the best shot possibly to take on one of these like big, scary, hairy problems that's systemic and plaguing community. And so, yeah.
No, absolutely. And when you think about your typical entrepreneur, and again, not everyone makes it, but the important piece is getting up and trying again, right? When you keep putting forth that, and venture capital, much like baseball, 300 gets you in the Hall of Fame, right? So three out of 10. So that means seven on the other side maybe didn't come to pass. But when you think about investing and opportunities along that way, clearly with the focus on ESG and sustainability and impact, all of the good work that you're doing and all of this outstanding project would seem to me that it really falls into that because a lot of people nowadays, you look at investment funds and you look at your 401k plans, they're taking more interest in where the money's going. And you know what, I want to invest in a company that does this or that doesn't do this, and you wind up putting it forward that way. And so, I mean, you're catching them certainly, at the moment in time when this makes such a difference to investors and companies that they work with and the communities that these companies are in or these projects are in, to be able to go in and solve a water problem or to improve access in a healthcare clinic that will then take away a worse outcome later is incredibly important. So George, just to kind of for the audience, people listening today and listening back to the replay, how can interested parties get connected to you and maybe reach out to you and potentially get involved? Because it sounds like as you continue to build your ecosystem, and it's an amazing ecosystem, and I've seen the lists and it's terrific. How can people get involved?
Yeah, so look, there's a few different ways. Most of them start by visiting the Resolution Project's website at resolutionproject.org. There are opportunities to mentor fellows. That's a really great way to give back and to share your experience and expertise as an entrepreneur, as an investor, and to help transform a young person's life and how their journey unfolds. I would encourage those who are in investment and who play in the space to consider expanding your investment lens. If you aren't looking at things with an ESG overlay or an SDG overlay, or just a general impact overlay, I'd encourage you to expand your investment lens. And if you just in your outreach, note that you heard about. You heard about me from, on the Leading Entrepreneurs of the World broadcast. I'll be sure to respond. You can also find me on LinkedIn, and otherwise, I'm always happy to connect with folks who are doing good things, whether they're aspiring entrepreneurs or established ones, trying to continue finding new ways to do good things.
All right, well, terrific. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for all of your innovative advancements and all of the good work you're doing in the community. And I'm a big believer in mentorship. I do a lot of it. I always have. And you're really helping shape people. You're working on behavior, and you're improving lives. And that's incredible. That's really incredible. And you, again, from an embodiment of an entrepreneur, you certainly meet the title of our flagship series here, Leading Entrepreneurs of the World. So thank you for your time today and continued success. And best of luck. And we'll see you next time. Okay.
Great. Thanks so much, Glenn.
Take good care. Thank you. Great job.